Hello and welcome to Trade and Tariff Tuesdays. We're back with another edition of Avalara's webinar series discussing the Trump administration's tariffs and their impact on trade compliance. We started this weekly series back in February, so if it's your first time, welcome. If you've joined us week after week, welcome back. My name is Regina and I'll be your host. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. A friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal or tax advice. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review. We're recording today's event and you'll receive the recording later today. The console you're looking at can be customized. Feel free to move or resize the windows. The additional resources section contains a lot of great related resources, including the slide deck. And there are several ways to engage with presenters and attendees today. First, if you have questions, please submit them using the Ask a Question box. We'll save time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. You may also submit troubleshooting questions there in that box. Second, you can join our attendee chat by clicking the icon at the bottom of your screen with the two chat bubbles. The attendee chat will appear, and we encourage you to introduce yourself, network, and discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking on the emoji icon. If since this session is less than an hour and intended to be interactive and responsive, it's not eligible for CPE credit. Just to note that Avalara's Customer Conference Crush is on tour with 2 locations coming up in September. We have Atlanta and Dallas, so check out events.avalara.com for details. With trade talks advancing and tariff clarity emerging, we're moving our series to bi-weekly. Join us for timely updates and actionable strategies to strengthen your supply chain heading into 2026. As speculation turns into legislation, now's the time to stay proactive and plan with confidence. So you can check out those dates on this slide and then also register, and dates will be coming on our webinar page. All right, let's meet our presenters for today. We have our 3 regulars back with us. We have Craig Reed, General Manager, Cross-Border, Patrick Frith, Senior Director of Growth, Cross-Border, and Shane Bogdan, Director of Sales, Cross-Border. And now I'll hand it over to Craig to get us started.
Thanks, Regina, and welcome back, guys. Good to have the band back together and talking about everything that's going on. As Regina mentioned, we are going to move to bi-weekly. However, we will kind of keep an eye on things. It's our feeling that things are, while not necessarily stabilizing completely, but maybe slowing down a touch, such that weekly might just be a little too much. So we're going to move to bi-weekly, but we'll kind of keep our eye on it and see how things develop in the world of trade and tariff news. So on that note, we will talk about some of the latest news that's been going on lately, some of the implications to your business, how you can take action with Avalara, and then we'll, as we usually do, we will get on with some Q&A at the end, but we'll also sprinkle it into the presentation. If you ask questions, we try to kind of relate it to what we're talking about if we can. So feel free to post questions whenever you like. First, though, we like to do a poll question, so we'll do that again today. Our poll question is, what is the effective date for the expanded list of steel and aluminum derivatives tariffs? So we'll go to the voting page here. Please select the appropriate answer. Give you a couple minutes. I always click the next button too fast, so I'll give you guys enough time to actually answer the question. And this was announced very recently, right? There's a lot of changes with those particular 232s. So see if everyone knows when that happens. All right. Let's click next. Well, that's interesting because we threw a curveball in there for you. August 27th is the end of de minimis. August 18th, yesterday, was actually when the expanded list of steel and aluminum derivative tariffs went into effect, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But that's the correct answer. So those are in full force and effect. I think the CBP published a list of all those different HTS codes that apply. So with that, let's get into the latest news on trade and tariffs. Patrick, August at a glance, what's been going on?
Right, okay. Well, we're just over halfway through August. Already, we could summarize this into, I suppose, 5 big headlines. The first one is, as Craig just mentioned, the steel and aluminium. 407 HS codes have been added to that list of derivatives. So, quite often when we hear steel and aluminium, we just think of, huge pipes and construction bars and things like that, but it goes a lot further. That word derivatives really does open it up to so many other things: consumable cans, kitchen appliances, this sort of thing, things that you see around the house every single day. So those are affected too. 407 HS codes, of course, far too many to put on a slide, but as you can imagine, our duty and tax calculator has got all 407 in there, so we know when calculating which are affected and which, importantly, which are not effective. So that went into effect yesterday, so we're in it now, we're living it. India is the next one, got walloped with 50% duty, tariff. So talks broke down. There appears to be no continuation of talks at this point, so we'll have to wait and see. So that was a big shock, I would say, the India. On the flip side, China got relief. So the 90-day suspension we're in effect. It is ongoing until December the 10th. So we are currently enjoying, I suppose we can use that word, enjoying the 30% on Chinese imports. And that will see us through to the holiday, right? So holiday imports will continue, albeit at 30%. There's also an impact on the diminished. Shane will talk about that a little later on. So I think stable for the next 3 months, and we can plan holiday imports from China based on what we're seeing at the moment in this 90-day pause. The 7th of August, that was a couple of weeks ago, all those tariffs went into effect. So the countries which had reciprocals in place were enjoying the baseline, the 3-month break during the baseline, the 10%, and did not do a deal. Their reciprocals kicked in. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. And then transshipments. So the US administration decided that anything which was deemed to be transshipped through a third country, so imagine origin China, over to Vietnam, Vietnam repackaged, and then sent to the US, that would be considered a transshipment and therefore would attract 40% duty, regardless of whatever deal is in place on that particular product. It would be considered transshipment, which is 40%. So those are the 5 big headlines so far in August. We've still got a few more days in August. A quick glance at the map. So starting from left and going right.
Just before you go there, sorry, Jacqueline's just asking, are the steel and aluminum 407 50% stacked? No. So if it's a 232, it's a 232. It's not stacked on top of any other tariffs, as far as I'm aware. So that's the tariff. Yeah.
Correct. Straight 50%. So let's have a quick look at the map. The map's filling up as deals pop. So Canada, 35% tariff on Canadian goods, not covered by USMCA. More about USMCA a little later on and what qualifies and what doesn't. Mexico, 90-day pause on the 30% IEEPA tariff. Good news for Mexican imports for the next 90 days. The EU got their deal. Okay, the baseline 15% across most sectors. Steel and aluminium excluded, remember, that's 50%. Switzerland had a bit of a rough time. It got increased from 31% to 39%. Think chocolates, think expensive wristwatches, cuckoo clocks, so on and so forth. Those you're paying 39% for when they import into the US. Brazil stuck on that 50% for most products. And as we saw, beef is included in there, to the delight of US ranchers and competitors' ranchers. Think Australia, places like this. So that's sitting at 50% plus on items like beef. India, we just mentioned, tough deal at the moment, 50%. Let's see where that goes. China on hold, we mentioned that. Vietnam got 20%, but remember, transshipment, and they were singled out. It's any country transshipping, but Vietnam was singled out because of this potential flow of goods from China to Vietnam and then into the US. Japan got their deal. They were pretty happy with that, 50%. Taiwan also got decreased to 20%, reasonably happy. Semiconductors, chips, things like that. And then Indonesia, finally, huge population, obviously. 19% tariff. So that's the map. We'll see what gets added as the days and the weeks go by. And I'll round off before handing over to Craig on this one. This is our adapted Rose Garden slide. Remember, we've got a list of the countries. The deep yellow, the dark yellow, is what was proposed on the 2nd of April. The following column there is the adjusted. So what the ultimately what happened with the reciprocal that was proposed on the 2nd of April and where is adjusted. The dark blue highlighted were increases. So bad deals. Brazil, we mentioned, Brunei, Canada, Cambodia. Just calling this out. Leon, who's a faithful on these calls, pointed out that we had a bit of a mistake on Cambodia. You were quite right, Leon. Thanks for calling it out. We've corrected it now. We appreciate your contribution week in, week out. And then the light blue ones are the deals. Okay, so where things got a little bit better from what was proposed on the 2nd of April. So as you can see, more light blue than dark blue, but still some countries are experiencing some troubling tariffs, and we'll have to see where that goes in the coming weeks and months. Craig?
Yeah, so where are we now? With China, Patrick mentioned 30%, which is on pause. That's a combination. So there's the 10% baseline, remember, but 20% IEPA. So that's the fentanyl tariff, think of it that way. But the important thing to remember about China is that Section 301 tariffs, which are a broad swath of goods that apply, are still have tariffs on those as well. So the 30% is stackable on China, meaning that, you know, based on the Section 301, it could be, which goes for anywhere from 7.5% all the way up to 100%. You add the 30% onto that. The average is around 55%. So that's usually why you see, you know, 55% for China, because those 301s are still in place. There are some exemptions to that for the 301s, but for the most part, 301s still apply, and the 30% goes on top of that. So that's how you think about China. Canada and Mexico, kind of in the same boat, somewhat. So in that USMCA goods are exempt. For Mexico, we don't have recent stats on where they're at with USMCA goods, but they were about 50% before all this started happening. They're on pause, so the 25% still in effect. It's going to 30, but again, paused. Canada went to 35, but the interesting thing about Canada is before this all happened, I'm in Toronto as a reminder, so I get a lot of the Canadian news. It was around 40% were USMCA eligible, but what's been reported up here is that a lot of the goods that were eligible, folks just never took the time and effort to make them USMCA eligible because their baseline tariffs were pretty much nil. So now there's been a huge effort, obviously, to try to qualify for USMCA, and a recent bank report said that up to 95% of goods in Canada could qualify for USMCA. So that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. There's also a big fear that that the USMCA will be renegotiated before it expires next year, well, before the renegotiation period, July next year. So that's something to keep an eye on with USMCA. So for everyone else that's not covered by specific letters or agreements, they're still at 10%. The UK really got the best deal, 10% on exports, 25% on steel and aluminum, and 10% for the first 100,000 vehicles. Patrick mentioned a lot of the rest of them. I don't need to go through all of those. It is on our tariff table, which when you get a copy of this presentation, that link will be clickable, so you can go and see it. And then just quickly, as a reminder, there's 25% of countries that buy oil and gas from Venezuela, 50% on steel and aluminum. And again, back to the question, it's not that, as to the best of our understanding, is not stackable. So if it applies for steel and aluminum, that is the tariff. 25% on autos, 50% on copper. And then we had an announcement about semiconductors. So the effective date of 100% on semiconductors is yet to be determined. So we'll see what happens there. So that's kind of a summary of where we stand with all the different trade agreements and different news. Obviously, the biggest, at least from our perspective, one of the biggest pieces of news was the end of de minimis. So Shane, tell us about the end of de minimis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've been talking about de minimis for, since we started these back at the beginning of February. And, for everybody who hasn't, that's new to this, that hasn't kind of heard our talk upon this, I'll kind of quickly summarize it. De minimis is the threshold at which goods are duty free. So the left-hand side of this graph basically is data from CBP, illustrating the trend of de minimis parcels entering the United States. And the United States previously had a de minimis threshold of $800. So goods coming in under $800 from another country, no matter what country of origin, were duty free. So think about the Xi'ans, Timus over the past couple of years. You can see, so basically back in 2015, there were about 125 million parcels entering the U.S. under de minimis. Fast forward to 2024, that went up to 1.36 billion. So this became a pretty bipartisan approach across both aisles on what is the U.S. really going to do in order to curb this volume, primarily because they started seeing an influx of fentanyl and other illegal goods coming in through these channels. So, last year, there are a couple bills in place, even by the Biden administration. This year, CBP, the Trump administration, wanted to tackle this. Well, fast forward to May 2nd, the U.S. basically said, hey, any goods, country of origin for China and Hong Kong, we're going to remove de minimis for those goods, that $800. So anything coming in has to pay the applicable duties and taxes. Well, then the one big beautiful bill came out. Basically, I believe it was signed in July, and part of that signature in July, there was a clause in there and said basically by July 2027, there's going to be removal or adjustment on de minimis. Well, lo and behold, kind of the bomb drop that actually the U.S. is going to fast forward that, and starting on August 29th, the de minimis suspension is going to happen for all countries importing into the U.S. So all goods coming from another market importing into the United States under that $800 will be qualified to duties, taxes, etc. So what does this really mean moving forward? So before the 29th, as I just mentioned, goods under that $800 was covered by Section 32. A subcomponent of that was Type 86. That's how these goods were previously being processed as coming in. Now, not only is this impacting the threshold at which these goods come in, it's impacting the compliance part about this whole piece. So after the 29th of, coming up in another week here, these goods can be coming in from must be qualified and be filed through ACE. So ACE is part of CBP. So it can either come in through formal entry if it's over the $2,500, but what we're talking about here is everything primarily under $800. It'll go through entry type 11. But as required as part of this is a full detailed 10-digit HS classification code on these pieces. And where things are getting a little muddy in the water is in relation to, okay, well, now it's on the carrier now in terms of understanding what that specific duty is going to be, and also providing that HS code. So if you are a non-postal carrier, you're going to be basically impacted by the ad valorem duty. So that's going to be the duty rate at which was set out by the Trump administration, these IEEPA tariffs on those. Now, if these goods are going to start coming over through postal, well, postal has this different nuance. They can either come through at an ad valorem rate for those, or they have the ability to be under a specific duty threshold. So, for example, countries with IEEPA tariffs of less than 16%, it's $80 per package. If the IEEPA tariffs between 16 and 25%, it's $160. If the IEEPA tariffs above 25%, it's $200 per package. So these costs and complexity are extremely high. Now, what's also interesting about these postal channels is that postal and carriers are going to have to start reporting out on this on a monthly basis to the CBP. So they're going to have to start submitting a monthly worksheet, basically illustrating the country of origin for each of these shipments, the calculated duties, as well as the classifications coming on here. So you'll hear Craig talk about the 4 horsemen. I just covered 3 of the 4 horsemen that CBP is going to be wanting on a monthly basis here moving forward. So Postal is also going to have the ability to switch on a monthly basis. But I mean, this is absolutely critical in terms of low value parcels coming into the United States. For all you retailers out there, what is also going to be critical if you are if you're sending goods in or fulfilling goods in from another country, you're going to want to ensure you're illustrating those taxes or those duties and taxes at checkout to provide basically full cost transparency to that U.S. consumer. Just as we speak to U.S. merchants about selling internationally, the number one driver for cart abandonment is not illustrating those applicable costs at checkout, those fully landed costs. You're going to want to ensure that you are now presenting those at checkout so that international consumer, that U.S. consumer, is not thrown off when that parcel gets to their door and having them pay additional fees. Have them calculated at checkout and collect those. So these are parts that you're going to have to really start thinking about as part of this whole change on the 29th. Now, I was talking about CBP in terms of, these new complications and these new processes that they're going to be requiring, country of origin, HS codes, duty rates. If you're not following CBP on LinkedIn, I would highly advise it. I mean, they are going full boat in terms of enforcement around all of these tariffs and making sure that these imports are following the specific guidelines. And they are finding and collecting fees as part of these. So perspective here is so far through, I believe it's July 15th, full year so far, they've collected $136 billion of total duties, taxes, and fees. All of 2024, they collected $88 billion. So they are well ahead of within, the first 8 months, 7.5 months of the year, they are well ahead of that $88 billion. So I think we probably foresee this getting closer to $200 billion by the end of the year. And you can see what's driving that. It's basically $68 billion of these additional duties, taxes, and fees that they're collecting from the IEEPA tariffs, the 232 automobiles, China, et cetera. So again, enforcement is strong. They are collecting. They are reporting out on all of these numbers. And again, we expect these numbers to continue to go up across the board here. Now, Craig mentioned something, as part of, the USMCA piece here. And I'm seeing some kind of questions in the notes here. But, for Canada and Mexico, any imports coming in currently are exempt from these tariffs if they qualify as USMCA or CUSMCA. What's very interesting, we started calling out a stat back in March or so, basically stating that, about 38% of goods coming in from Canada were qualifying for USMCA. Craig alluded to the fact that RBC basically just came out with a report a couple of weeks ago. And in June, that number of 38% of goods coming into the United States is now up to 92% of Canadian goods exported to the US across the border duty-free under USMCA in June. So these manufacturers, these sellers are now getting on board and understanding what goods of theirs are qualifying for USMCA. And we broke down, it is a complex piece here, but we did break down, some sticky steps here. The first one is obviously determining eligibility. The goods must either be wholly obtained within the US, Mexico, Canada, meet specific guidelines, gathering 9 data elements. And this is primarily due to the fact that there's actually no official form like NAFTA, where the government issues a USMCA certification origin. So you basically have to go through the process of getting the certifier type, certifier details, exporter details, producer details. There's other elements as part of that 9 in there. Then there's the process of completing a certification. Then there is looking at the exemption for low value goods. Want to ensure that you have a written statement basically certifying that the goods qualify originating from those specific markets, going through the certification and submission process, looking at additional special rulings on there. So there are nuances on there. What we will say is that if you have questions on those, go to the CBP website or go to the CBSA, the Canadian border website as well. They basically break all of this stuff down. Last thing you want to do is be paying duties on goods that really should be qualifying for USMCA.
Yeah, and just to tack on what Shane's saying, one of the big differences between NAFTA and USMCA is that you can self-certify. There are requirements for certification. You can self-certify. However, you have to keep documentation in case the government asks for it. So that's kind of the key, is you need to make sure you can prove that, like in general, that the vast majority of the value of the good was added in the United States or Mexico is really kind of what it boils down to, but there are a lot more specifics that we don't have time to go through here.
Just before we move on, I just want to address James Stroller's question. Is there an easy way? Unfortunately, James, the short answer is there isn't an easy way. Step one, though, James, is understanding the HS codes of your products. There are thousands of HS codes covered in USMCA. So step one is knowing your HS codes and then mapping them to the list that qualify for USMCA relief, and then go through the steps. Once you've identified, let's say 10 of your products qualify, then you go through those steps which Shane just went through. Okay, eligibility of your product, recording, certification, all the rest of it, and then you will enjoy the benefits. So a couple of steps there. First one is HS codes.
But again, in general, if most of the value of the good was added in Canada and the raw materials came from Canada, that's really what it boils down to, is where was the value of the good created? So think about it that way at a very high level. As Shane and Patrick mentioned, there are specifics, but they're outlined pretty clearly on the CBP and CSA websites.
I will say, if you are a reseller of these goods and trying to understand your catalog, which qualify, I would reach out to your manufacturer, because they would be the ones to know those goods, which ones do qualify for the USMCA.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about what we call the four horsemen, or the four puzzle pieces of global trade. The first being de minimis. We've talked a lot about de minimis. The note I would make here is that de minimis is different for every country in the world. So, if you're just importing to the US, obviously that's changed to zero, but going into Canada is $20, for example. The UK has a different de minimis, EU has a different de minimis. So if you're shipping to different countries, it's important to understand what those de minimis exemptions are. And sometimes they're different for duties and taxes. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Secondly, country of origin. We've been kind of circling around this with USMCA. Country of origin, we get this confusion all the time. Country of origin is not where the product shipped from. Country of origin is where the majority of the value of the good was made, or where the product was transformed. That's the country of origin. So even if that's what the US is referring to as transshipment, by the way. So if the product is made in China and shipped to the EU, and then it's shipped from the EU into the US, that is not an EU country of origin, that's a China country of origin. So very important to know your countries of origin. And then probably the most important piece of information is your tariff code classification. So this is the numeric code that describes the type of good that you have. Every country has a different version of this. They're common up to 6 digits, but typically countries add between 3 and 6 more digits, usually 4. So it's usually a 10-digit code that describes what kind of good it is. And if you think of an Excel table, the tariff codes, or the numeric descriptions of the goods, are the rows, the country of origin is the column, and the intersection of those two is the duty rate that you're going to pay for the country that you're going into. So that's why those two things are very, very important to understand, because they're key pieces of information that drive how much you're going to pay in terms of duty. And then lastly, declared value. So, that's what the duty rate applies to. So the value of the good times the duty rate equals how much duty you're going to pay. And there's been, reports of folks trying to lower the declared value. And actually, I've seen some posts from the CBP where they've said that they've denied importers their declaration of value because they were, kind of fudging the numbers a little bit. So you have to know what your declared value is, and there's rules around that. So again, all of these things are very important in understanding what ultimately is going to take place at the border. So you really need to know these things for the countries that you're going into. We'll go through how we can help you out with that in a little bit, but those are the things to know. Those are the 4 key pieces of information. So with that, let's go into a little bit more about the implications for businesses and what's happening out there in the industries. Patrick, the auto industry.
Yeah, big industry here in North America, huge industry, and we did a bit of a deep dive into this, and it's a 12 so far year to date. It's a 12 billion hit from the trade wars. If you think about it, it's cars, automobiles is probably, for the most of us, is probably the second biggest purchase we make, and there are millions of vehicles on the roads, and the vast majority of them have parts that are imported into the US, where they undergo final assembly, or units that are finished goods. So top of the list, taking the hit, Toyota have reported just recently $3 billion impact on their vehicles. It's the biggest selling brand here in the US. And you would expect on that list a rest of, Japanese, Korean, German cars. But take note, there are US manufacturers on there, GM, Ford, Tesla. Why? Because their supply chains are global. They depend on airbags or spark plugs or gears, whatever it is that come in from other countries and are imported into the US and put into that final model wherever it's made in the US. So big hit all across the board. Toyota taking the big one, $3 billion. So we can expect now to see pricing changes as we go forward because they're not going to absorb 12 billion, right? It's going to be passed on. More about passing on costs a little later on, but that's where the auto industry sits at the moment. Moving on, we decided also to take a bit of a look at this section 232 as it's in the news. Went into effect, remember, yesterday. And what industries are likely to be hit. So automotive, we've just mentioned, but also aerospace. I was at a conference recently where somebody asked the airline that I use mostly flies Boeing aircraft. They are dependent, huge percentage of their parts are dependent upon imports from other countries. Are my seat tickets going to go up by 30%, 40%? I mean, it's a great question because the cost of producing these planes, it has to be absorbed by somebody, airlines in this case, and as a consequence, are they going to start increasing prices for things like for seats, tickets on planes? So automotive, aerospace, construction industry, so pipes, nails, wires, fittings, all going to have higher costs. They're going to impact contractors who come around to your house and do repair works, this, that, and the other. The value of these things are going to go up. Electronics and appliances, we mentioned that, things in your kitchen, a lot of things in your kitchen, aluminium and steel required. So we're going to see the unit costs of those go up, presumably. And then energy equipment, that's not exempt either. So solar panels, framework, these sort of things on your roof, it's all going to the costs are going to increase because they're so dependent upon aluminium and steel, and which are now being affected by the tariffs, which we've mentioned in detail. So just a bit of a snapshot on the industries which are going to be impacted. And back over to you, Greg.
So who's covering the cost of these tariffs? It's interesting. We've been kind of keeping track of this through our polls, but the report that we saw from Goldman was saying that the tariff costs were being absorbed by the U.S. consumers at about 22% rate through June. But they're predicting that 67% of the tariff costs are going to start. So really, 22% were being absorbed before through June, but predicting that 67% are ultimately going to be passed through to consumers. So 64% of the hit, obviously, inversely, have been taken by the businesses from the tariffs so far. And then that'll lower to 10%, obviously, as the consumers start to take the hit. So that's the prediction from Goldman Sachs, is saying that really it's starting to shift from the businesses and to some degree the suppliers absorbing some of the costs, and it's going to shift over to the consumer because the businesses just aren't going to be able to continue to absorb those costs. But we're going to see what you think about that coming up here in a second. And it certainly mirrors what we've seen in our poll results to date. So that is going to be interesting to track going forward. So with that said, how do we create a proactive supply chain, a resilient supply chain?
Yeah, and I'm going to fly through. I know we have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. But obviously, diversification is the name of the game here when it comes from shipping to manufacturing. Country of origin is dictating what the duty rate's going to be. And obviously with supply and demand changing in terms of pauses or turning these duties back on. We've seen shipping rates also change as well. So you want to ensure that you're front loading at these applicable times, or looking at other carrier options that potentially are not penalizing. Again, going back to de minimis and looking at postal carrier option routes, should you be also looking at non-postal carriers as part of these leases. Automating global trade compliance, you don't have to do this alone. There's tools out there that you can do to classify your goods, ensure you have the most accurate duty rates readily available. Working with a customs broker, this really is a no-brainer. We talk about USMCA on here. Want to make sure that you're getting the appropriate advice for all of your trade-specific questions. The 4 horsemen here that Craig alluded to, ensure all your product details are up to speed. Country of origin, understanding the de minimis, understanding what the applicable HS classification code is. These are all applicable things that you're going to need, as also submitting these things to the CBP when these goods are being imported in the United States. So no longer were these, these were optional previously to some degree. These are now mandatory. And building inventory to absorb these short-term headwinds. I mean, if you're importing goods from, China with the 90-day reprieve is kind of a breath of fresh air, especially as we go into holiday. You want to make sure that you're taking advantage of that reprieve as quickly as possible, but also thinking about option number 1 up there, exploring diversification, because who knows what's going to happen in November. So we're going to go into a poll question here that we always do every week. Are you planning to adjust your supply chain due to the impending global trade changes? Which I think now we can actually change impending to the current global trade changes. They're here.
Yeah, and remember, you can select multiple of these. So if you're doing multiple different things, then you can let us know that. It'll be interesting to see how things are shifting. I don't know yet has been the most popular choice to date, because things have been a little unsettled, obviously, but we'll see if that's starting to change. We'll give you a couple more seconds. All right, let's go ahead. Yeah, so diversification of, yes, so we are starting to see it, right? Diversification of suppliers and manufacturers is increasing. That was lower before. Switching to local and rethinking distribution strategies. So I don't know yet, still relatively high, but a lot more in the first 3 choices, right, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So also, what are your plans for addressing the increased cost of tariffs for your goods? Are you going to pass them on? Are you going to include a tariff surcharge, absorb the cost? And this kind of goes back to what we're talking about with the Goldman Sachs study. You can select multiple of these, by the way, as well. So please let us know what you're planning to do. It'd be interesting to see if it kind of mirrors where things are headed, or where Goldman Sachs thinks they're headed. So we'll give you another second for that. All right, let's see what everyone has chosen. All right. Wow. So I kind of chuckle, because we've never seen this number before. We've never seen 84% passed on to the consumer and a tariff surcharge. So absorbing the cost has dropped dramatically. And it actually mirrors pretty closely what Goldman Sachs was saying. And the other interesting thing for me is that sharing the cost with the suppliers, Goldman Sachs was saying, were and are going to remain right around the 10% range that they're absorbing. So the other 90% is what either the consumer or the importer is going to absorb. And this is what you're saying, is 90% is going to go to the consumer, which is really, really interesting. All right, so how can the businesses keep up with these changes, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we talk about this every week. Last thing you want are penalties, fines, non-compliance. CBP is obviously cracking down with the stats they're producing now, 15 to every 30 days. We're going into peak season here. Last thing you want to do is also start overcharging or undercharging as applicable duties if you are doing these B2C transactions, or even if you're going at it from a B2B perspective. And then the added cost of customs and supply chains, everything that's happening now. You want to mitigate your risk from all of those pieces here. So where we help is, from an Avalara cross-border standpoint, think of us really as three C's. Duty and tax calculations is the first C, understanding what those duties are going to be in real time based upon what's issued in the Federal Register, based upon what's across all the markets. We have a team that's solely focused on making sure our content is up to speed. Second C here is classification. We have a plethora of HS classification tools, from AI and machine learning to self-serve to a team of 250 individuals that will go line item by line item with the highest level of accuracy and confidence to classify those goods for you. And then we have the last one here is content, trade restrictions, content, and management, making sure you understand, are goods coming from another region? Are there flags on those that you should be aware of as they're being imported? Should you not be shipping those goods to specific places? Are there PGAs or other rulings that need to be taken into consideration as part of your due diligence of understanding the cross-border landscape currently right now? So we will show a quick demo on one of our tools here. And let's see.
Go ahead and run that demo. Yeah.
Welcome to the Avalara Tariff Content Classification Tool demo. Take a tour to see how Avalara can help your business's global trade compliance. First, choose the country of import. In our example, we will use the US. Click to proceed. Next, select the country of origin. In our example, we will use China. Click to proceed. Next, let's describe our product. Click to proceed. Now, we are ready to classify. Click to proceed. The tariff classification tool needs to know a few more details. Click to select the upper material. Select the lower material. Click to proceed. We've now reached an HS6. Click to drill down to reach the HS10. Since our product is a men's golf shoe, click to drill down. Since our product is not welt footwear, click to drill down. We have reached the HS8. Click to find the HS10. We have now reached our HS10. Click to see rate description. Here, we can see the total duty amount for this product. This totals 28.5% for the general rate, plus 10% for the preferential and additional duty rate, which totals 38.5%. This concludes the demo. Want to talk with an expert about your global trade compliance? Schedule time with a member of our cross-border team below for a live demo.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you want a 14-day trial, we do offer that for that particular product. We do have other products, so make sure we can help you understand what all the other products are that Shane described. Variety of different products, pretty much any use case you can think of across calculation, classification, and content. So if you'd like to do that, please let us know if you want a demo of that particular tool. Give you another second or two. And then if you want to talk with a Avalara trade expert about your global trade compliance needs, please let us know that. And we'll get you in touch with someone. And while you're deciding if you want to do that, we can tackle a few questions.
Yeah.
Any ones that jump out there, guys? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick, we'll start with a quick one. There was a question, let me just get the, so it was about bringing in things, souvenirs, and when you're a traveler and coming into the US, does the de minimis impact you? De minimis is for commercial goods. So goods that are brought into the US with commercial value for commercial purpose. When you're bringing in goods, so let's say you travel to Mexico, you buy a few souvenirs, you've got $200 limit there. So you can buy items for your home or whatever for friends up to $200 without having to do anything. Once you go over that $200, very wise to declare it as you walk through. So that's the red channel, not the green channel, when you enter the US, and just highlight what you've got and the values over 200 and deal with it with CBP at the point of entry. But commercial goods is what it's targeting. Personal effects, unaccompanied baggage, things like that, $200.
Yeah, another one from Adrian that I think is really interesting. If we import low voltage copper and aluminum electrical cables with an outside aluminum interlock armor protection from Canada under USMCA, does the product still qualify for duty-free treatment, considering it contains both aluminum and copper? This is really where your HTS codes come into play. So you really have to know your HTS codes, because they've outlined what is going to be subject to the 232 tariffs and what is not. If that product is subject to 232, then yes, you're going to pay it. If it's exempt, then you're not going to pay it. So that's really why your HTS codes need to be correct. What else have we got here, guys?
This one is easy way to find out what products or our products are covered under USMCA agreement. Again, I would say we mentioned this before. If you're bringing these products in, work with your supplier. They should have all the applicable documentation on those goods. I'm assuming this is the 40% transshipped on top of the country tariff. Yeah, from my understanding, it's stackable, so that 40% is the additional penalty on top of where those goods actually derive from, where they're not transshipped from too. So yes, they are all stackable. Let's see.
A lot of questions. Christopher Guzman, for instance, a lot of questions on, do my products qualify for USMCA? So what will be the tariff? Just think back to the demo that you've just seen. The use case in that was China, of course, but if you were to use our software that was just demoed and select Canada into the US or Mexico into the US, or even Mexico into Canada, it will tell you if your product, if that HS code, if you have gone through the process of verification and your product then qualifies, this is the duty you can expect to pay. If it does not, this is the duty you can expect to pay. So we will show you, as an output, we will show you both duties, USMCA and non-USMCA. So the software really has all the answers. We don't have them off the top of our heads, but the software does.
Yeah, and with that, I think we're at time, so we're gonna have to end. But we will follow up with you. There's a lot of great questions here. We can't get to all of them, but we will follow up with you after the webinar. You'll get a copy of this presentation. We have a lot of great resources on our website, so you'll have clickable links when you get a copy of the presentation. We also have a global trade glossary that is helpful for you, and our upcoming webinars calendar, Regina, is posted there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. We have some upcoming webinars, including, of course, our trade and tariff series, and you can check that out at avalara.com/webinars. And as Craig mentioned, you'll receive a post-event email later today with a link back to the console where you can access the recording, the slide deck, and the additional resources. It'll also have a link for you to go to our registration page for upcoming webinars. And we hope you can join us again next week as we continue our weekly and then move into our bi-weekly webinar series. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to our speakers. This concludes today's webinar.
Thanks, folks.